You're tuned in to the Stingbat Radio Network on FM 101.2 KRPG. Welcome to Dungeon Master Diaries, a podcast about Shadow Dark and other role-playing games, where two GMs talk about their recent experiences at the table and hopefully give you something useful that you can take to yours. On the show today, we discuss an okay session. Hello there, sages and adventurers. My name is Matt, and with me, as always, is my good friend and GM colleague, Jody. Jody, how the heck are you?
I'm all right, man. I'm going to be honest. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to hype it up for the show. I'm fine. I'm okay. It's all right, I guess.
Jody, this is an audio medium. All people have to go on is the excitement in your voice.
Well, sometimes things are fine. They're aggressively fine.
All right, let's unpack that, because on the show today, we're focusing on a recent session that you ran, Jody, specifically one that you aren't feeling too hot about. I played in this session, so I can give some context from a player's perspective, but let's go to the table. What do you got?
Well, so we're returning to my Salt Marsh Saturdays, where, if you're new to the show, I'm combining a variety of modules and resources, all loosely centered around the 5e campaign book, Ghost of Saltmarsh, but they combine heavily with the greater Sword Coast of Faerun, plus lots of old modules and some modern modules, as was the case in this one. I was setting up to run the Meadery Mishap, maybe more on that in a future episode. Anyway, gathering everybody together, inspired by a carousing roll, our party meets a priest ally who became known as Brother Thomas, labeled by Matt as a wandering mendicant, a monk, if you will, traveling the land and spreading the good word of his God. Now, Brother Thomas, in grand role-playing tradition, said, "I'd be happy to walk with you to this town outside of the area that you've heard of, but first, I need you to go track down this lost druid named Farron Castellar." The party, armed with a few clues, sets out to investigate the sea grove of Sylvanus, not too far outside of town. So, with the adventure in hand, setting up to run the Meadery Mishap and the clues all in place, I literally got out miniatures, built a sea grove on the table with standing stones, kind of a Stonehenge kind of ring, gathered the miniatures I'd need, and I began the session, and I prompted our heroes, as you approach this woodland sea grove, all is quiet. What do you do? Explore this ring. And that's where I made my first mistake.
All right, Jody, let us gather around the fire and discuss said, and by the way, this is your words, not mine, mistake. I want to start off with a little bit more context for what's going on here and where specifically you think you made a mistake. Because from that setup, what it sounds like is you think just giving us free reign of this space was the mistake. What was the context that perhaps led to the wheels falling off the bus? Again, your words, not mine.
Yeah. Well, that was it. In classic lazy GM teachings of Mike Shea, fast start. I mean, lots of people, promote this of like, hey, have a fast start, have a moment to jump in. PDM of Dungeon Craft often talks about within 5 seconds, you should be rolling a die and doing something. Matt Colville has a great video on Orcs Attack and like, just get in there and do something. I knew there was going to be an encounter at this ring. The fact that I began with, and there had been a bit of a pause. We're coming off of our teacher summer time, and this was during teacher summer. So there'd been a little bit of a delay in this group getting together to play. I knew there was going to be an encounter, a combat encounter at this ring, and I absolutely should have started with that to get into the space. Instead, I left you as a group to just kind of poke around at this strange woodland space, and there wasn't anything super distinctive or interesting other than, who doesn't love a good set of standing stones and a stone ring in the woods? And
dude,
ancient gods.
You're speaking my language.
Right. Mr. Dolman Wood sitting across from me.
That's right.
That's right. And that's where I talked myself out of it, because I actually even had the debate, which is partly why I'm able to so just casually kick my own butt, is like, I made the choice not to do a fast start and then watched it play out for exactly the reasons you want to have a fast start. So the traditional wisdom is get them into combat, get them rolling dice. It forces you into character. It forces you making, meaningful tactical decisions. Whereas a just open role-playing space, and in a weird way, if you zoom this out, it is even, I don't know if it's worse or better, but it is very akin to you're at the wooded sea grove and you begin to explore the location. What do you do? Is not terribly different from you're in a tavern. What would you like to do? Like, it's just this kind of nebulous space. And there aren't even really now people to interact with except each other. And there was a frog, and you guys could talk to the frog, and you began talking to the frog, which then lended itself towards, and I'm not critiquing players at all. What I'm going to say is going to sound that way, and I want to be real clear. I'm not. It led to silly, because you're talking to a frog or trying to figure out how to talk to a frog. And like, that is inherently absurd. And there's a couple PCs that are going to be more apt to do that than others. And then how do the other people fill the time? And it was just a poorly structured scene in terms of how you should engage with it. And so you guys embodied your characters and did a great job of it. And you really earnestly did interact with the ring there was two dwarves, and they were really interested in the stones and what could the stones tell us. And, the two witches were like, I'm going to poke at these frogs, and what's going on with these frogs? I want to know about these frogs. And so the whole thing made a certain amount of sense, but it also, it set down a path of kind of light and whimsical that I think carried through the session, not in a negative way. And then we'll get to the second half when things continued to go wrong, which was in part my decisions and in part just the fates continued to keep this session squarely in the it's fine zone. But that's why I'm actually critical of the opening. Is if I knew there was going to be a combat there, I should have just started with the combat.
All right, so let's talk about the opening, because I don't know, I'm of two minds about this. I think you throw us into combat. I think there's the context that I want to reiterate is it had been a while since we played. And so but I do think that combat is sort of, I don't mean this as a critique of you. I just mean as a critique in general. Combat's the easy way to start a session. It's just, and to me sometimes it feels like a crutch. And I don't think you were going to use it that way, because I think in this case, it was a combat encounter. You're not just foisting it in there. And there was narrative purpose to this combat encounter, as we found out later in the session. But I think there were some other ways. From a player's perspective, let me tell you how I felt. I didn't feel that this was maybe unconsciously or unawares. This is where the session took on a tone that you didn't want it to, or started down a path that you didn't necessarily want it to go down in terms of tone, mood, etc. But for me, I felt like this was just the price of playing a role-playing game sometimes. One of the things that I have had to, and I struggled with as a GM is, and this is something you learn in teaching, is just dead air, right? And whether you call it thought time or wait time as a teacher, you ask a question, and it's not a great thing to do with a class of 30 some odd students to just go, hey, does anyone know the answer to this question about the reading last night? And no hands go up. And there's a point in your teaching career where you learn that if you just wait a little longer than is comfortable, usually someone will raise their hand. And if you're just looking for a basic answer, this is a totally reasonable thing to do. And I felt like that's what was happening, is you gave us a scene, and it took us a little while to get into it, and we had to work through some silly moments. But I actually felt like my dwarf wizard got to cast a spell on these standing stones and we actually got some like valuable, interesting information about the world. I felt like there was both actionable information we got from this frog about like how to get where we were going and some things about what was to come, but also there was like some cool setting lore. I don't know. I thought the scene worked well, and I wonder how else could you have started this scene, do you think, other than combat? Because I think it's pretty plain to see why combat would have worked. But I'm interested, given the context that I just gave you, and I don't know, maybe you didn't want there to be like a not painful, but somewhat awkward, I guess, kind of, the train is just getting going kind of a thing. There was that feeling for sure. But sometimes that's just the price of admission. What else could you have done?
Well, and that's a totally valid question, because I'd kind of stopped at the two options. In my planning, I went, here's one option, here's another. Cool. I don't want to do the combat. I'm going to do the explore the space. And the joy of, much like your dwarven wizard casting the spell on the stones and then seeing how the world worked, that was all, I mean, in my own version of generative play, that's why I call for a lot of random dice rolls and a lot of strange things, is that was all new. That stuff, I mean, not to ruin anything, but that was on the fly. I have a character who's interacting with the world. What do I know about the world? What's a reasonable answer? And okay, that's the answer now. And that's how the world works. And so I don't typically do the like, hey, tell me who's in the tavern, players. I don't do that, because the couple times I initially tried it, my players were like, no, that's your job. You tell us who's in the tavern.
I know. I still think that was a specific player thing. I love that.
Case in point, you did the thing. And so I just use a different end around to get that to happen now, rather than just cold asking. I gate it behind some dice rolls, and the world is still revealed through player choice, and it's fine.
Yeah.
For this scene, I think I could have immediately had the frog just approach you, rather than there was some song and dance to get to the frog and find the frog. And how does that work? Because I wanted you to interact with, and it was the intentional like classroom. I'm going to slow onboard. The problem wasn't so much the slow onboarding as a choice. It was that it set the rest of the session just followed suit after that. And it wasn't like any one thing in this session was like, man, I really blew it. This was terrible. I'm an awful GM and I should quit playing, and I owe you guys a refund on your 4 hours. And it's not that. No. It's just the session was fine. Years ago, I said they can't all be bangers. And this one was not a banger. It was fine. The thing is this: if I had started with the gnolls come rushing in and attack, like, hey, you're in there. You guys, what do you want to look at? We look at this. Bam, let's roll for initiative. Had I made that choice, you still could have done all the investigation afterwards.
Yeah, I
wouldn't have. It didn't delete the other, but it would have been like, and now we're in the game, as opposed to we're grabbing snacks and beverages and then we're coming and like, what's the question? And like the just transition from real world to fantasy world. So in terms of what could I have done else, I could have had an oracle, like you all get into the stone and there is you hear Farron Castellar from afar cry through the stones, and you know he's far away, and then you have to, like, I could have given you some sort of direction and impetus to like act on, as opposed to the you meet in a tavern, you are at a standing stones, and like just relying on my players, much like as a teacher in a classroom, just relying on my students to go, you guys got to take the lead here for a minute, and we'll sit and be awkward until somebody does the brave thing and says, here we go. Giving a little more scaffolding and structure, especially on a delay. And that would be kind of that note on this one, is why I'm kicking my butt a little bit, is because I was like, on a normal every 2 weeks kind of pattern, I wouldn't worry about it, because you guys would jump into character very quickly. With a month delay, you guys needed, even as veteran players, it's good teaching's good teaching, good GMing's good GMing. Give an on-ramp. Give an easy lift.
Yeah. So, well, I have this problem coming up, right? Like, and at the time of recording, about a week and a half from now, I'm going to run a game for 6 players who haven't played since the end of May, beginning of June, actually June 1st. And so I'm thinking about this too. And we're starting with downtime, which we kind of were right at the beginning of this session. We had to make some choices about where to go next. And I'm starting in a very narrative way. I sort of have a framework for it, right? We're going to decide what everyone wants to do for downtime. But like, I think the hard part, we did a show about this a long time ago, right? Like how to coming back from a hiatus and, how to really start. And I think like so much is made about starting sessions because whether it's you should roll a die within the first 30, whatever, or I buy into that to a certain degree. I think most of the kind of pithy wisdom in RPGs is only so useful. But I have what I have internalized, at least in the context of what we're talking about here, is that it's the choice. Like you need a choice soon. You need a decision point. And if there was one thing that I do think was lacking, it was that when you said ready, go, what do? We had limited information about what we were looking for. And this was ostensibly started out as a mystery. Someone has vanished. This is their grove. Look for clues. And I think that was how I internalized it.
And that's accurate.
And I think, to your point about maybe the gnolls should attack, I want to push back on that because I would have been a little bit annoyed because that's not the frame in, like, maybe it would have, I don't know. It felt to me like the gnolls came and attacked at the right moment. Like we were there for a little while. Maybe they were watching us. I think at one point you even said like, you hear like a snapping in the woods. I felt like that raised the tension in a way that starting with combat can sometimes actually feel, it can like undermine the tension of building to rolling initiative. And I don't know, it might have started off more correctly in terms of tone and all the things that you were talking about, but like I do think sometimes that starting a session with combat is a bit of an easy way out. And same with starting a session with like a meaningless roll just to get everybody rolling a die. It's like those things there needs to be like a decision point, some consequences or some stakes, right? And I don't know, I actually enjoyed this part of the session. We can get to the part that I wasn't super stoked about.
Fair enough.
I actually thought this was great, but let us continue on in the session and down the road to continue our wheels falling off the bus analogy. And
so you guys made contact with Ye Old Frog. You protected the frog from the attacking gnolls, driving them off. And the frog realized you guys are pretty okay, and maybe you can go help out. It turns out this is the familiar of the druid you're looking for, and he croaks, and you guys came up with a really lovely system of croak once for yes or twice for no.
Oh, I forgot about that.
And used the frog as almost like a sending stone, or not a sending stone, but a lodestone for pointing direction, finding your way north. And your frog.
At
compass.
one point, I think one of the characters was holding the frog with two hands and pointing the frog in different directions, and then another character was like looking at the frog, going like, "Croak once for yes," or what. It was. I can see how that would be considered silly.
And whereas I am going, and that's why we play role-playing games, is because that took a heartbeat. That was a few seconds of table time. And, underlying this whole conversation, I really want to kind of, maybe I should have led with this, yet again, a story of things I should have led with, is your mantra that is valid of y'all chose to spend 4 hours telling a story with me, and I have agreed that as the GM, I'm going to facilitate 4 hours of, to the best of my ability, enjoyable play. This whole session, if I had to put to jump to the end and hang the dunce cap of shame on the head of this session.
Here we go.
It didn't feel like a waste of 4 hours to me.
No.
However, could we have gotten a lot more done? Yes.
Yes.
And it has that little stinky asterisk on it of we could have done more. Mm-hmm. And I made choices as a GM that dragged the timeline.
Interesting.
And so that's really what was the sin of why was this session just okay as opposed to, damn, that was awesome. And that's where the blame undercurrent, like what was the sin? That was the sin and I mean, it's my old nemesis pacing. But in this case, it was more than why I wanted to talk about on the show. It was more specific in terms of the pacing missteps to me, and then some things that were out of my control, I was like, oh, I see what went wrong here and why I could have punched up. So starting with combat, we would have started moving through things faster. We would have started getting through things.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Using the frog, though, you all head on down the road, following the river, and you come to a river crossing. And the frog gives you the froggy, peace out ribbit. I'm done. I'm not crossing. I'm going home. And, you know, you all at this point saw more or less where you were trying to get to. And you had to cross the river. And you had a fun interaction with a water spirit that is, again, part of the module. And I thought was a fun interaction. Again, though, kind of silly. And led to some silly, in part because one of our characters now has our dwarven fighter has a fair amount of lore built up around strange, ethereal female spirits. And
we're trying to kind of hook him up with any and all ethereal, undead, or Fey adjacent spirits. And I will take some of the blame for this because I led this charge. I don't know. I'm of two minds. And I want to kind of pause here and talk about tone and stuff like that. Because when I'm a player, I think I am reminded of why players do things. And I think this is very good for GMs that don't often... this is why I think the GMs should play and why I am sad that a lot of GMs feel like they're forever GMs and can't play, is because... Not just because it's fun to play and not have to prep everything and just be able to show up and make character choices and whatever and roll dice and have some fun and eat some Cheetos. But for me, the thing is that I am reminded of what the mentality of a player is, which is usually quite different than a GM. I find as a player that because I have more time in my own head between opportunities for me to act, that sometimes I run through several different ideas, and the first idea was probably the best idea. Right? This is kind of an improv 101 thing, where whatever your first idea was is probably the best idea. Then I start thinking about it, and I go, I don't want to do that. Oh, I remember now that... and then I start thinking and perseverating on like, oh, it'd be fun. This is how I can bring in another character. And not always, but I think that sometimes that leads me to not degenerate play. I don't think I have a degenerate player situation.
Not at all.
But I think in the past it has, for sure. I would think too much about how to make the most of my moment in the spotlight and try and pack it with a bunch of useless nonsense. But I can now see why players will sometimes go for the low-hanging fruit, is because they either that is their instinct, and that's one thing. But for me, I felt myself trying to both add a bit of levity, bring in another character, and I was just like, I was trying to do too much, and it ended up being, I think, maybe not what you were looking for. That's a very long-winded way of saying that I think sometimes I have too much time in my own head as a player.
And I think we all do that, and I think that's normal for players, especially those of us with, to use your phrase, and I am maximally guilty of it myself, theater kid energy. When I play, I definitely like to play, and you know, it's funny, as a GM, I often say on the show, like, I don't really do silly voices and stuff.
This is the weird duality of Jody.
Yeah, my characters are always silly voices and need to go to 11, to the point where I am worried right now that my fellow players in our bigger group are like, oh man, it's one of Jody's characters. He's going to screw us over, or there's some weird angle, or there's something and I'm like, no, this is just a guy.
You played the longest of cons.
I did do that
you
one
really,
time.
You did actually fundamentally ruin the trust of the group in your future characters.
In hindsight, much like this episode, it turns out.
Okay, continue.
So here's the thing about this scene. There was no what I was hoping my players would do. It's a fun scene with a fey creature. I know most of my players are always down for an interaction with true fey. My worldview is there is a true fey, think kind of, you know, Nordic, Irish folklore of the fey realm and whimsy and strange, and probably not to be messed with too much unless you're an elf. And even then there's some really strict rules. And so my play group, I know, is like, hey, here's this fey thing in the module. This seems dope. It's a great way to deliver world lore, and it's a fun scene. And it was all of those things. none of which is a sin. There is no problem there of here's a fun scene that my players will enjoy that's going to deliver some interesting world lore. However, what did my opener choice do? It's a fun scene with some interesting Fey weirdness to deliver world lore.
Oh, okay, I see where you're going with this. Yeah.
So if it weren't for the combat in between them, it was a repetition of scene. I didn't need. In theory, I could have jumped all the way ahead and we could have started at the river. I could have cut the whole thing and said, you show up at this river crossing to get to the place you're trying to get to, and there's a frog and Noel's attack and there's a water spirit, and that would have been more interesting. So it was in terms of my own being critical of my own process. And I want to, like, I'm not, for those who are worried, like, is Jody on the edge? Is he going to quit GMing? Dun, dun, dun. No, I'm not. I just, just being self-reflective and like, hey, what could I have done differently that would have allowed us to get through more and got more out of the session? There are 2 scenes that I did the same freaking thing in. And the next scene is not exactly the same, but it's more of the same.
Yeah. So, okay. So take us through the next scene. We cross the river. We have this interaction with the Fae.
You gain some, and you get to the other side. You find out it's a landing. You start getting a sense of like, oh, this is where stuff comes down the river, and this is the raft. And then we make our way up, and we get to the meadery at long last. The meadery of the, that the mishap of the module happens.
The eponymous.
That's the word. So. And you get there and you have this interaction with the people, and you mention the name of the druid you're looking for, which I love that you guys as a party didn't do the like, well, let's feel these people out and blah, blah, blah. Like I felt like that was a win. You guys just were like, yo, we're here to help and we're looking for this dude, which was great. And the reason I was really stoked on that, one, is it moved us through the scene in a really satisfying way. It didn't demand you guys do this weird song and dance of being overcautious, which is a thing players in my world sometimes tend to do because I tell them everything's dangerous all the time with my GM choices. So they understandably respond accordingly, which is good on them. So you guys just were like, yo, we're here to help. Do you want some help? And the people were like, yes, we would like help, especially now that we know this druid and you're here to meet him, and cool. And they brought you in, and there were some secrets, and it was a fun NPC role play scene where you did get a sense of here's what's going on. We know where the druid is. He went down into our caves / hive a week ago. He hasn't come out. Can you go find him? That's where we sent him last. His backpack's literally sitting there. They're, either they ate him or he's down there. Everything seems to line up pretty well. And, that set you guys off. But again, yet another role play scene where we're just gathering information. So other than the one opening combat, I have now gone role play scene, role play scene, role play scene. So I didn't really think through in my planning the difference of scene, the variety, and this is, I always think of, Hankrin Fernale, Runehammer, Brandish Gilhelm, whatever name he's used.
All.
Yes. He has some about a variety of scenes in ICRPG. There's some really great discussion of this. And this is an example of when you don't consider that in your prep. If you are a scene prepper and not a pure roll it and see what happens every, few encounters, if you are a session planner, these are things you need to. And I just didn't see it in terms of like role play scene, 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 where I needed something to break that up or to condense all that stuff. And that's really what I'm seeing here on the opener, because we were now about halfway into the session in terms of just hours at table. And this is where we had gotten to, is you guys were leaving this couple and you were heading out to go into the cave where the bees and the hive is, and where this druid's gone missing.
So you don't feel like that 2 hours was well spent, is what I'm hearing.
It just wasn't efficient.
Okay. So one thing that I have learned from the Discord and from other members of the community who run Shattered Arc and play Shattered Arc is that there's a fairly sizable difference between, first of all, the way that GMs run different styles of game, open table, closed table, more narrative games, etc. But there's also just like a genuine sense of difference in terms of role playing and what the game is for. One thing that might be confusing, or I don't know, or just we're halfway through the session. We aren't in a dungeon. Shattered Arc suggests that it is a dungeon crawl game. So I can't really remember, but were you were you leveraging any of the mechanics in Shadow Dark other than basic stat checks? Were you like pushing people in rounds, or were we mostly in like a free-form initiative situation? Because I think that one of the ways that I have found to resolve pacing issues is to just start going in rounds and pushing initiative that way. Like if I see the game is dragging, that's one of the things that I just immediately go to. You might notice this now, which is that if I start calling for rounds, it is largely because I want to push the pace of the game a little bit. And then we'll go back into freeform once I feel like, the session isn't flagging or there isn't a need to really go like, okay, y'all, we gotta make some decisions here because we're just faffing about. Mm-hmm. So do you think that going in rounds and really being more prescriptive about going around the table and getting a sense of what everyone was doing would have been more effective here? Or would that have just, I don't know, muddied the waters in terms of these scenes? Because I'm thinking about, we had 3 roleplay scenes in a row, and Shadow Dark doesn't really offer that many tools outside of rounds to really dig your teeth into roleplay scenes, which is fine. But that means that if you get into a situation like you're in and you start to realize in the middle of one of these scenes that, oh no,
right.
So what do you think about, like, would that have been?
So I think I did start that when you guys were interacting with the water spirit. I think you guys were in rounds there because there was some level of danger. Like, okay. and if you had just been flippant and crappy to the water spirit, the Fey water spirit, it would not have taken well to that. But you all didn't do that. You, in fact, then were leveraging your play and the rounds into like, let's try and make an ally of this thing. And our elven priest who has a water affinity is a sea elf, which is just rapping only. There's no rules or really anything of note on it, but it is narratively in-world rapping. And there is an element also to pull back even further. I think that's great advice. I think just the notion of like, hey man, this RP scene is flagging a little bit. We need to pick up the pace. Let's go. Is just start calling rounds. I mean, what do you do? What do you do? And a couple of those, and I think players just intuit that like, oh, we need to start making some decisions and making a choice. So I think that's a really gentle and thoughtful way of moving things along. I think, again, like for me, this was I just needed to condense a bunch of this stuff down. Okay. That's really the punchline is like, man, there was just too much here that needed to be condensed down. Also, and why I didn't see it, why I will give myself the out of like, so Jody, if you know that, why didn't you do it? Well, I didn't see it at the time because hindsight's 2020. And this is a narrative driven sandboxy campaign. So it is player narrative. You guys make the choices about what you want to do. And then once you get on a rail, the rail will take you to a hub, and then you will have a new open decision space. And then I will put you on, you make a choice of which train to get on. And then I take you down that rail, and that takes you to a new hub, and so on and so forth. That's kind of how I run. But the world is largely open to you, other than I have told you guys just as GM to players, hey, I'd like to stay around Saltmarsh and build up this city to have it start feeling alive and like a real living place. And we're starting to see evidence of that that's playing out in a really cool way.
Yeah, for sure.
But that was way above table. That wasn't in session. That's a like meta thing. So I think there's an element of like, okay, so it's a narrative kind of talk through. We're going to get those, as you said earlier in the show, the price of admission moments of like, we're just playing through and getting, I always talk about, loving to feel the texture of the world and the dirt under my boots and hear the wind through the trees.
Dirt under the fingernails, Jody. That's your favorite thing in the world.
It is.
To me, that is a very uncomfortable situation to be in, but
I love it. I love down in the mud with my sword and my dagger and my bloody nose and stuff. That does mean I'm going to run into spots like this and need to do a better job of being mindful. Now, we got to the dungeon.
Yeah, let's talk about the dungeon.
All right. So, get into the dungeon, and you're given some warnings about like, hey, there is honey all over the place. This is actually a feature I really like of the module itself. The bees are going to be aggressive. The beekeeper himself is like, yo, I'm like, they're not even really letting me in. So you're going to have to be very careful with them, and gives you a sense of, you guys kind of asked for directions. So you had a sense of like, if we go east in the caverns, there's going to be one set of things. And if we go south, there's going to be another. And if we go west, that'll take us to this. So you had some informed decision-making as you head into the caverns themselves, the cavern / beehive. The bees have made their hive in these caverns out behind.
These are giant bees, by the way.
And that's one of the big spoilers of Meadery Mishap is what is the deal and why are people being cagey and why is there not forthcoming information about the meadery and the mead not being delivered? That's actually the story in the module is the mead deliveries have stopped, and it's a big deal for this town because the town in the module, that it's a huge source of income, is this renowned mead. And you guys have heard a little bit about it, but it wasn't a huge big deal because Saltmarsh is a giant city. So what you find out pretty quickly is, no, the bees are massive. They are, 3 feet long bees, and that's a different problem. It is that and if I start smashing them, they're going to get mad, and then I'm going to have a whole hive of bees mad at me, which actually was a thing I really enjoyed to a point. So you guys get in there, you make some choices, you go up to where you believe, I think you guys had the informed, I think there is a queen bee up here.
Yeah.
Her guard bees were not stoked on you being there, understandably. Nope. So you guys said, well, we know where we're supposed to go. There's some smoke in the cave that you picked up on. You start following that deeper and deeper into the cave. We get down to the lower cave where there are a couple of bees in this very low, smoky cavern where the honey has kind of really slid its way down and is particularly heavy in this lower cavern. And you guys are confronted with the smoke is entering this cavern, and you have to get past the bees to get to where the smoke is and figure out what's going on there, which presents actually a really interesting combat encounter because you now have combatants in the bees that you don't want to just murk. Just squishing bees is not going to go over well. That doesn't serve you well, both because of drawing the ire of the rest of the bees in the cave, and now you're putting these poor people who are already in a financial hardship basically out of business by killing all their bees. That both things are bad. What follows is not only a comedy of errors as your dice just betray you in grand fashion. We are having the maximum player frustration, which you guys all played through like champions, of nobody can make a roll at all. Like the roll dice are just not in our favor.
Yeah.
A good player idea of finding a way to communicate with the bees is thwarted by, again, a couple bad rolls and a spell won't go off. People go running into the room and there's honey everywhere. So there's a rule about if you do aggressive actions, there's a chance. It's almost every test in the area is easy and you guys are failing them left and right. And I failed to deliver the information about where the smoke is coming out of. I said one set of things and the party y'all just didn't hear it, or I didn't convey it clearly enough of the size of the hole in the ground that the smoke was coming out of. Right. Literally the example that was given is like, oh, so it's like Winnie the Pooh climbing into the tree and getting stuck at one point. And I'm like, no, the hole in the ground's like 2 to 3 feet across. And literally the whole party is like, what? Somewhere you guys had it in your head that it was like 12 to 18 inches across.
Right. I thought I could go
2 to 3 feet.
I mean, I tried to like sit on it.
Yeah. To plug it.
Yeah.
And a 3 foot wide hole is not, yeah. And I don't know, like as I attribute it to you of players will hear half of what you say.
Well, that's a sly flourishism that I take to heart almost more than anything else in role-playing games.
And
yeah.
And I literally distinctly remember
50% of everything you say.
Literally was describing the hole in the ground and held up my hands and said, it's about this big, and gestured it. And just for whatever reason, the timing of that comment, nobody heard it except me. And I'm like, no, I definitely said it and it was the wrong time. And so players missed it, but also GM did not deliver it clearly. And this scene just lagged to the point that we ended up ending the session in this combat. And man, oh man, was that disappointing, both because you guys were actually pretty close to the end of the dungeon at that point, and then the sin of all the earlier little mistakes really showed itself, because I went, man, while the slow start was not a big deal, the 3 fun role-playing scenes in a row was not a big deal. None of that in and of itself was like, damn, you really blew it there, man. Now that we hit a scene where just die rolls and interaction slowed things way down, and this scene just kind of wouldn't go away. Now all that lost time, frankly, about an hour of lost time.
Now it rears its ugly head.
Yeah, because now we're in the middle of something, and I go, okay, well, we'll see in 2 weeks where we'll pick up with the gnolls emerging from.
Okay, so
yeah, and I know you have some other really specific takes. So run me through it.
All right, so I'm going to give you the thing that I found the most frustrating about this encounter. The room is maybe double near in terms of its diameter. It's a circular-ish cavern. There's rough walls. There's maybe a couple of stalagmites in there. And then there's this hole. And these 2 bees. Like you said, it's covered in honey. I found the fact that you had to make a check in order to move double near, to spend your action to move again. That, to me, was worse than just having to use your entire turn to move near with no check. Because, and this is where we differ, Jody, I felt like this encounter had way too many die rolls. There were moments where I felt like everything in this room is just completely random. Like the combat is die rolling, of course. I'm rolling to move, to reposition myself, to try and do the thing that I have been telegraphed is the thing I'm supposed to do. And I'm failing to do that, and I'm being punished. Like, not only, so I decide to use my entire turn to move, and then when I fail, I just lose my action, full stop. That is actually what set me off the most. That I declared that I was going to try and double and move near, and then use my action to move near again. And then I failed a roll, and I only moved near once. And then my turn was over. That, I think, is like an almost unforgivable thing to do in an RPG that isn't about that. Like, even like this is, I don't know, and you might disagree, but that is how it worked on one of my turns. And I remember after that, I was like, this is a random encounter. Like, I mean random encounter, not in the sense that it randomly happened, in that the outcome of this is a roll a d6, 50-50 d6 decider. That's how it's going to go. That's how it felt in the moment. Is everything was a die roll, and we rolled poorly, but like, is that really why are we playing Shadow Dark if everything's a roll? And this is where you and I differ.
That is a difference of you and I in terms of GMing, because I lots of times have said I like to roll to find out. I just want to be clear about a couple things before I respond.
Right.
So you would have preferred that basically you can't run or move double near.
Yeah. So here's my issue is that
it's just, you just can't do it.
Right. I don't want to roll to lose my action.
Okay.
The having to gamble on losing an action instead. And once it happened once, we knew it was the case. It was the first time where I was like, wait, what? I just my turn is over. And it was at a point where like I needed to get where I was trying to go. Mm-hmm. And losing a round fundamentally changed the encounter in a way that like meant that a couple people ended up going down because of the nature of these bees, where if you fail a constitution save, you go to 0 hit points, or you go unconscious, I guess. And that the rounds are so precious because combats in Shadow Dark do not take very many rounds unless they are designed to go further. But this one wasn't going to take that many rounds.
Yeah, should not have gone this long.
No. So in my head, I'm thinking that is a legitimately wasted round. I could have cast a spell. I could have done something else. I could have done some lateral thinking. And I was denied the opportunity to do something with my turn that would have been useful to everyone, simply because I failed a die roll that I didn't know about, and also it didn't reinforce anything interesting or fun about the room. I know you said you liked the honey, so I want to hear your perspective on this.
Yeah. So I do. And one, like, had telegraphed multiple times about you guys like slipping, but nobody had ever done anything. You guys were really moving cautiously up till now. So, and I had made sure to narrate like, oh, it's really slip. Oh, you kind of slide down the stairs, and as just flavor text of like, hey, the floor is slick. The floor is slick. There's a lot of honey here. So, you know, in terms of my own not hitting with a gotcha when, hey, I'm going to ask for this die roll now that you've tried to run across this room at double speed. That's the attempt. And also heard on like, but you did feel like it was a gotcha still. So there's something to be learned there for sure. For me as a player, I would rather have I can choose to risk it or choose not to risk it.
Right.
That I can always move. If I want to move double, I'm going to take a risk, or I can move once and there is no risk. To me, that is the more preferable option. Additionally, the module calls out that if you fail, you go prone, and that's all it says. And so what I did was I threw a dice roll at, well, how far did you get in your movement? So you got your first move you get, and then how much of the next 30 feet do you get?
And you threw in another die roll, Jody.
Right. How dare I, instead of just saying you fall down, I was like, well, let me give you, D6 10 times 10 feet.
But you look at it from my perspective, I'm not reading the module, right? And so all I'm seeing is like a die roll followed by another die roll followed by another die roll. And I'm seeing my friends and neighbors going and like, I think that is what made this so frustrating for me personally as a player. I was fine with the failure. And I actually thought that like a few of the things that we failed at, and I don't even have a problem with the fact that we didn't get the description of this hole that was producing smoke.
Right. Ultimately it's a chimney you can climb down.
Yeah, and we resolved that in the next session. It was great. The issue I had was I didn't understand it. I'm going to back up a little bit here. On a previous ep, we've talked about the fact that board games shouldn't have to add mechanics to fix things. Mm-hmm. This felt like there were a lot of things happening in this room that were meant to fix a boring room. Like there were bees in here and there was a smoky chimney hole. But that wasn't enough, so there needed to be something else. And I felt like the elements of the room, like the actual environmental elements of the room, meant like they literally felt like we were moving through honey. They made it that they literally, and I don't mean this positively.
No, I know you don't, but at the same time, I am laughing of like, because that was the effect that was wanted.
Right. I think that's a bad choice. I think it's a bad choice as an adventure designer to design something that is going to purposefully drag your players through something that they will probably inevitably succeed at. Like, I don't know. It's just not interesting. We tried, I guess, to like, I don't know what we could have done in that room to have negated or dealt with it. That was the other problem is I was trying to think about, do I have anything in my inventory? No. I was looking at my sheet, which, tells you something. And do I have any spells? Do I have anything in my inventory that I can put on my shoes to make me a little bit better at this? And I was going so far as to think like, do I have any caltrops that I can like jam into the bottom of my shoes? I don't know. I felt like it was a purpose-built room specifically to make things either like literally take more real world time. Like there were just more die rolls required in that room than there should have been. And to make the characters slog literally through an encounter.
Yeah, I don't see it that way at all. And I mean, again, GM versus player, yeah. I don't see it. I am also, confronted, and I was immediately afterwards confronted with the GM has perfect information. And your question of like, well, what else could we have done? And I see a whole laundry list of things that you could have done, and even things you guys tried and then didn't have work out.
Right. Yeah. Because of a die roll.
Right. But you roll to cast spells.
Yeah, but
you roll to make attacks. You roll. You're in combat. Your favorite of when do I roll dice? There's the three things.
Yeah.
Well, two of the three were in play. Like, so
yeah,
these
but like
situations
something.
call
But
for
this
die
is the
rolls.
problem. It's like if you. Anyways, I've already made my point.
So
Continue, Jody.
thanks.
I'm sorry.
So as the GM, and I don't want to do the thing of like, well, if you guys did X, Y, or Z, then...
I think it's interesting though. I would be interested to hear your perspective on this, and I promise that like I am still a little bit frustrated at this room.
Mm-hmm.
I think I want to be very clear. On the whole, this was a very fun adventure, and I actually think that you're being too hard on yourself. Continue.
Thanks, man. I think this room is really fun. I guess why I'm going to say I think this room is fun is there are 2 bees, and yes, the bees are nasty if they sting you, and these particular 2 bees are going to be aggressive and attack you because they are, you learn later. I guess I should have said this at the beginning. I'm going to talk about, the meatery mishap in some detail. Spoilers, I guess. But there's a reason these 2 bees are aggro. I'll leave it at that to not spoil too much. And they're going to attack you. So if you go in this room, these bees are coming for you. I guess my pushback is this, is let's pull the wrapping back, okay? And
Sure.
change it to an ice encounter with the exact same series of components. Change it to a swamp encounter with the exact same die rolls and components. To me, I'm like, those are quintessential fantasy RPG stuff. There is a room with an environmental challenge and a combat and a clear objective. Now, where things go wrong is the description around the hole in the ground is the clear objective that somewhere I lost in translation. I did not get that clear objective to you guys strongly enough, I think. That the smoke that is causing the problem is coming from that hole in the ground that you can climb down. So you need to get through this room. And that definitely screwed things up because your guys' initial reaction wasn't get through the room.
That is very true.
Right. And so that derailed things. Again, I'm not going to kick my own butt too hard other than like, man, I needed you guys to have that information.
We
you didn't
plugged
get it.
the hole and expected that once we plugged the hole that within, a round or 2, maybe things would get better,
and this is where I'm going to be critical of you guys as a play. What could the players have done?
Sure.
You guys, and this happens a lot with all play groups. So it's like, it is what it is. Y'all did not communicate with each other really very much at all. And it started that way and kind of went that way. And people were each doing, this is like classic superhero movie of all the heroes separately attack the big bad guy, only to realize that if they'd worked together, they could have beat them all along. And
you're not making this room any more fun for me in
that analogy. So, it began with, you took it, you turned invisible and ran off. And like, that was literally how you described of like, I'm there and then I'm not there and I disappear.
Mm-hmm.
And then you plugged the hole and I was like, all right, I'm starting a timer. And then literally the next player, 2 more player actions going in initiative order. The 2 players next did something that was like, that's going to aggravate the bees. You've been warned not to do that. And then like literally did something to further aggravate the bees. So I was like, it hasn't even been a full round of time. Like the bees literally haven't had an initiative beat. Right. It is 2 player turns have gone by. So it wasn't you did something and then the environmental thing completely stopped immediately. It was like, no, like you've done the thing and it will have an effect and was described as having effect. But again, not overt enough that it was translated to my players. So you guys, again, that's on me. But it did happen. And then immediately somebody did something of like, hey, the bees are not willing to give the beekeeper their honey. The bees are not giving up their honey. The bees are being hyper. And then immediately after plugging the hole to stop the smoke to get them to chill out, which I thought was a great idea and is not something that's covered in the module. I was just like, that's a good idea. Do that. Yeah, hell yeah. And I'll adjust the size of the
hole. Portal is a hell of a spell.
Yeah. And I'm like, I'm going to play fast and loose here. You guys came up with a creative solution to my problem. Yes. I'm going to say yes. And then player immediately went, I am doing something that will aggravate them. And I'm like, I'm not going. And I can see plenty of GMs would go, just move on. Like the scene was already flagging, just ignore it. And I'm like, yeah, that feels now that I'm changing the test mid flow. Like I am shifting a reality here that feels for me as too far.
Well,
and I would be open to the like, no, but like I did the thing and so it should have had the effect. And like, okay, I can't argue that. I just don't agree. I made a different call in the moment.
Well, look, I mean, I don't think we're going to agree on this room at all. I think that's pretty clear. Here's what I do think we can agree on is that it's time to hear from a sponsor and that we can come back and we can wrap up the show. Dungeon Master Diaries is brought to you by long-time sponsors, MeDungees. I mean, we don't even need to go over the fact that they're the underwear that crawls through cracks, not up yours. This is MeDungees we're talking about here. So many DMD listeners have been utterly and completely satisfied with MeDungees. We hear about it all the time. We have people showing us their undies on the road, Jody. I mean, people are coming up to me in line at various restaurants and establishments and saying, check out MeDungees. And all we're trying to do is make sure that more people know about this outstanding product. Because these are underwear that will keep up with you while you're being chased by rabid ghouls through the halls of the barrow maze. I mean, we're done with that dungeon, but it's still out there. And there are probably still people exploring it right now who have wadded up, chafing underwear. I mean, it's nothing could be worse, except maybe than running from a crookhorn under the eaves of Dolmenwood. But look, with MeDungees, there's no chafing, no problems whatsoever. So don't be the guy who forces the party to turn back just before the good treasure, because your nethers are redder than a troll's arse. I love that line, Jody. That's like my favorite line of the copy that they gave us. I think, I don't know, you've been wearing MeDungees. We've been over this. MeDungees are great. We know. I mean, this is sort of almost, this is like our longest term sponsor at this point. But do you have anything to say about MeDungees?
You know, I went to one of the MeDungie meetups.
You went.
I went.
I wasn't able to make it.
Well, you missed out. It is not only do you meet some delightful folks, but it is quite a show and tell. Redder than a troll's arse. Whole new meaning now.
I mean, I got to make the next one. But look, if you, dear listener, are ready to take your adventuring underwear to the next level, use code Dungeon Master Diaries. Very easy to remember. It's the name of the freaking show at checkout to get a new limited edition pair of underwear absolutely free. These ones have hammers on them, you dang Dungees. So don't get caught with your pants down unless you're wearing MeDungees. All right, Jody, let us bring this topic into the light with our core takeaways.
Hey, you know what? They can't all be bangers. Not every session's going to be your best effort. Still had a lot of laughs with this one. Had a good time. Have a lot of good things to actually say about the meadery mishap, so much so that I'd like to talk about it on a future episode. And despite the foibles, missteps, and poor die rolls, it still was a good time and gave me something to reflect and learn from. And maybe that's really they can't all be bangers. And when you've got one that you're like, man, that just wasn't it. You know, don't just kick your own butt. Look at it and see what you can do differently next time.
All right, Jody. So you and I just fundamentally differ on the way that we see die rolls. But I do think that something I want to point out here is that die rolls are fundamentally random, and I think that they can muddy the waters. If you let somebody roll a die, it means that there could potentially be a success, but it also means that you don't know the answer to the question. I think there were some instances perhaps where you knew the answer to the question that the player was asking and you asked for a die roll, which muddied the waters and kind of gave us some... Anyways, I don't want to delve too much into this, but I do think that like if you're a GM that likes die rolls, for players like myself who maybe aren't in that frame of mind or don't necessarily enjoy as many die rolls in our games, just be really clear about what the die roll is for and why the randomness is being infused into the game.
I think that's always good advice. I'm going to go with this, and this is not a shot at Matt, listeners. It is just, I think this is good.
Only personally.
There it is. This is just good sound advice. A good combat encounter by most every metric includes three things. There are clear stakes or a clear objective. That's the first one. Second one, the environment itself is interesting. And the third one is, well, there's combat. So There it is. Clear objective, interesting environment, and you got something to fight. And man, if the fight's interesting, that's a bonus.
All right. Well, I get the last word here, Jody. I want to admit that the one thing that probably could have solved all of this is that if the four of us players would have talked to each other and actually communicated about our plans, about what we knew about this situation, we probably would have arrived at a much more satisfying conclusion to this, to this whole scene, this whole encounter much sooner. And if we would have asked you, Jody, clarifying questions about the situation, like I am willing to admit that there is a sizable amount of blame to be placed on myself and my fellow players because we just didn't communicate effectively. And this game cannot be a one-way street from you to us.
Well, in terms of communicating effectively, hopefully we did. And as the torchlight grows dim, we hope you were able to find something useful in this episode that you can take to a future game. If you have any questions or unique experiences from your table that you'd like us to discuss on an episode, you can email us at dmdiariespod@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on YouTube or Facebook. But best of all, get at us on the Dungeon Master Diaries thread on the Shadow Dark Discord channel. You can find links to those feeds and any of the materials we referenced in this show in the episode's show notes. Until next time, keep it sticky.
Dungeon Master Diaries is a production of the Stingbat Radio Network. It is produced by Jody Kropholler and edited by Matt Bruner. Our intro and outro music is composed by Christian Schuster, and Dungeon Master Diaries is an independent production and is not affiliated with the Arcane Library, LLC. Shadow Dark RPG is a product of the Arcane Library. Copyright 2023.
Sure is.